Picture this. A woman in a crisp white military uniform walks into her sister's wedding uninvited. Two silver stars gleam on her shoulders. The family freezes when a guest suddenly stands up and salutes her with the words that change everything. Admiral. What happens next will shock you. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button and drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing revenge stories like this one. Meet Rebecca Williams, a 32-year-old woman who spent the last 14 years serving her country in the Navy. While her family lived their comfortable lives, she was deployed across dangerous waters, climbing the ranks through dedication and sacrifice. What her family didn't know was just how far she had risen. Rebecca grew up in the small town of Maplewood Heights with her parents David and Linda Williams and her younger sister Jessica. The Williams family seemed perfect from the outside. David owned a successful car dealership and Linda worked as a real estate agent. They lived in a beautiful house on Elm Street, went to church every Sunday, and were respected members of their community. But Rebecca always felt like the odd one out. While Jessica was the golden child who got straight A's and never caused trouble, Rebecca was the rebellious one who asked too many questions and dreamed of adventures beyond their small town. When she turned 18, Rebecca made a decision that would change her life forever. She enlisted in the Navy. Her parents were not happy. They wanted her to go to college, get married, and settle down like a proper young lady. But Rebecca had other plans. She wanted to serve her country and see the world. The day she left for boot camp, her father barely said goodbye, and her mother cried, not from pride but from disappointment. Over the years, Rebecca's relationship with her family grew cold. She would call home during holidays, but the conversations were always short and awkward. Her parents would ask when she was coming home to start a real life, and Jessica would barely speak to her. They didn't understand her career, and they certainly didn't respect it. Rebecca threw herself into her work. She excelled in every training program, volunteered for the toughest assignments, and quickly gained the respect of her fellow sailors. She served in the Middle East, the Pacific, and anywhere the Navy needed her. Her dedication and natural leadership skills caught the attention of her superiors, and she began climbing the ranks faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, back home, her family continued their lives without her. They stopped mentioning her in conversations with friends and neighbors. At family gatherings, they would change the subject when people asked about Rebecca. It was as if she had never existed. Jessica graduated from college, got engaged to her high school sweetheart Kevin, and became a teacher. She was everything their parents wanted in a daughter: safe, predictable, and close to home. When Jessica announced her engagement, Rebecca was not asked to be a bridesmaid. In fact, she wasn't even consulted about the wedding plans. The wedding date was set for a Saturday in June. Rebecca found out about it through a Facebook post from a distant cousin. She stared at the beautiful engagement photos, seeing her sister's radiant smile and her parents' proud faces in the background. There was no mention of Rebecca anywhere. That night, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She requested leave for that weekend, bought a plane ticket, and prepared to attend her sister's wedding, whether she was invited or not. The morning of the wedding, Rebecca put on her dress white uniform. She looked at herself in the mirror, adjusting the two silver stars on her shoulders. At 32 years old, she had achieved something remarkable. She was now a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, one of the youngest in history. But her family had no idea. As Rebecca drove through the familiar streets of Maplewood Heights toward the church, her heart pounded. She hadn't been home in over 3 years, and she knew her unexpected appearance would cause a scene. But she was tired of being erased from her own family story. She parked across the street from St. Mary's Church and watched as guests filed in. She recognized many faces from her childhood: neighbors, family friends, and relatives. They all looked older, but the town seemed frozen in time. Rebecca took a deep breath, stepped out of her car, and walked toward the church entrance. The moment she stepped inside, conversation stopped. Heads turned and whispers began. Rebecca ignored the stares and found a seat in the back row. She could see her parents at the front of the church, completely unaware of her presence. Jessica was nowhere to be seen, probably getting ready in the bridal suite. As the ceremony began, Rebecca watched her sister walk down the aisle in a stunning white dress. Jessica looked beautiful and happy, and for a moment, Rebecca felt a pang of sadness for all the moments they had missed together. But that feeling quickly turned to anger when she realized that Jessica's wedding party was complete without her. Not even an empty space where a sister should have been. The ceremony proceeded normally until the moment when Pastor Williams asked if anyone had objections to the union. The church was silent, but Rebecca could feel the tension in the air. She remained seated, but her presence was like a storm cloud hanging over the celebration. After the ceremony, as guests began filing out for the reception, Rebecca heard a voice behind her that made her blood run cold. It was her mother, Linda, speaking in a harsh whisper to her father. How dare she show up here in that ridiculous costume? She's going to ruin Jessica's special day. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists as she heard her mother's cruel words. She had served her country with honor for 14 years, earned the respect of thousands of sailors, and commanded ships worth millions of dollars. Yet her own mother called her uniform a ridiculous costume. She turned around slowly, facing her parents for the first time in 3 years. David and Linda Williams looked older, with more gray hair and deeper lines around their eyes. But their expressions were the same, disappointed and embarrassed by their eldest daughter. "Hello, Mom." "Dad," Rebecca said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Linda's face turned red with anger. "Rebecca, what are you doing here? You weren't invited to this wedding." "I'm here to support my sister," Rebecca replied, keeping her voice calm and professional, the same tone she used when addressing her crew during difficult missions. "Support her?" David scoffed. "You haven't been part of this family for years. You chose the military over us, remember? You can't just show up now and pretend to care." Other guests were starting to notice the tense conversation. Rebecca could see people whispering and pointing in their direction. She knew her parents were more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about having an actual conversation with their daughter. "I've always cared about this family," Rebecca said, "even when you stopped caring about me." Linda stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You embarrassed us by running off to play soldier. Now you're embarrassing us again by showing up here uninvited. Please leave before you ruin Jessica's wedding." Rebecca felt like she was 18 again, standing in the same church, listening to her parents tell her she was making a mistake by joining the Navy. But she wasn't that scared young woman anymore. She was a military leader who had faced enemy fire and made life-or-death decisions. She wouldn't be intimidated by her parents' disapproval. "I'm not leaving," Rebecca said firmly. "Jessica is my sister, and I have every right to be here." Before her parents could respond, the church doors opened, and Jessica appeared with her new husband, Kevin. The bride looked radiant in her white dress, her face glowing with happiness. But the moment she saw Rebecca, her smile disappeared. Jessica walked over to them, her wedding dress rustling with each step. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" "I came to congratulate you on your wedding," Rebecca said, trying to keep the hurt out of her voice. "You look beautiful, Jess." Jessica glanced nervously at their parents, then back at Rebecca. I didn't know you were coming. We didn't send you an invitation because we didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy with your military stuff." Rebecca felt her heart break a little more. Even Jessica, her own sister, had written her off as someone who didn't care about family. "I would have come if you'd asked me," Rebecca said softly. "Well, you're here now," Jessica said awkwardly. "But the reception is starting, and we have a lot of important guests to greet. Maybe it would be better if I left." Rebecca finished, Is that what you want, Jess? Do you want me to leave your wedding? Jessica looked uncomfortable, caught between her sister and her parents. Finally, she sighed. Maybe that would be best. This is my special day, and I don't want any drama. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her own sister was asking her to leave her wedding. After everything she had sacrificed for her country, after all the years of service, her family still saw her as nothing more than a troublemaker. Fine, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll go to the reception for a few minutes to be polite, and then I'll leave. I won't cause any more embarrassment to the perfect Williams family. She turned and walked toward the reception hall, leaving her family standing in awkward silence behind her. As she entered the beautifully decorated venue, Rebecca tried to compose herself. The room was filled with round tables covered in white linens, beautiful flower arrangements, and twinkling lights. It was exactly the kind of fairy tale wedding Jessica had always dreamed of. Rebecca found an empty table in the back corner and sat down alone. She watched as other families laughed and celebrated together, feeling more isolated than she had during her longest deployment at sea. At least on her ships, she was surrounded by people who respected her and valued her leadership. A waiter approached her table with a smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, please," Rebecca replied. The waiter nodded and was about to leave when he stopped and looked at her uniform more closely. His eyes widened as he noticed the 2 silver stars on her shoulders. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "Are you a rear admiral?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, I am." The young man's face lit up with excitement. "My brother is in the Navy. He's stationed in Norfolk right now. He would be so honored to know I met a real admiral. Thank you for your service, ma'am." "Thank you," Rebecca said with a genuine smile. "Tell your brother I said to keep up the good work." As the waiter left, Rebecca felt a small spark of warmth. At least someone in this room recognized the significance of her uniform and her service. She sat quietly, watching the reception unfold around her, when suddenly the lights dimmed and the DJ announced that it was time for the father-daughter dance. Rebecca watched as David took Jessica's hand and led her to the dance floor. The music began and father and daughter swayed together as guests watched with admiration. Rebecca remembered how she used to dance with her father when she was little, standing on his feet in the living room while her mother played piano. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. As she watched her father smile proudly at Jessica, Rebecca realized that she had been completely erased from this family story. There were no pictures of her in uniform on display, no mention of her achievements in the wedding program, no acknowledgement that the bride even had a sister. The dance ended, and guests began to return to their conversations and meals. Rebecca was preparing to leave when she heard a voice that made her freeze in her chair. "Admiral Williams?" "Admiral Rebecca Williams." Rebecca turned around to see a distinguished older man walking toward her table. He had silver hair, kind eyes, and was wearing a dark suit with a small American flag pin on his lapel. She didn't recognize him immediately, but there was something familiar about his confident stride and military bearing. "Yes, I'm Admiral Williams," Rebecca said, standing up out of respect for what she sensed was a fellow veteran. The man's face broke into a huge smile. "Admiral, I can't believe it's really you. I'm Commander James Patterson, retired Navy." "Well, I guess I should say I was Commander Patterson when we served together. I'm just Jim Patterson now." Rebecca's eyes widened as the memory came flooding back. "Commander Patterson, from the USS Enterprise. You were my commanding officer during my first deployment to the Persian Gulf." "That's right," Jim said warmly, though back then you were just Ensign Williams, fresh out of the Naval Academy and eager to prove yourself. Look at you now, a rear admiral at 32 years old. I always knew you had something special. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Here was someone who remembered her journey, who understood what those 2 silver stars on her shoulders really meant. "Thank you, sir." Your guidance during that deployment shaped the officer I became. None of that, sir, business, Jim laughed. You outrank me now, Admiral. But I have to ask, what brings you to Maplewood Heights? Are you here on official business? Rebecca glanced around the room nervously. Actually, this is my sister's wedding. I'm from here originally. Jim's expression changed to one of surprise and then pride. Your sister's wedding? Well, I'll be damned. And here I thought I was just attending my neighbor's daughter's wedding. I had no idea Jessica Williams was related to the Rebecca Williams, the youngest female rear admiral in the Pacific Fleet. You live here in Maplewood Heights? Rebecca asked, surprised. Moved here about 5 years ago after I retired, Jim explained. Linda Williams sold me my house, actually. Nice lady, very professional. I had no idea she had a daughter serving in the Navy, let alone one who would become an admiral. Rebecca felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. My family doesn't really talk about my military service. They're not very proud of my career choice. Jim looked shocked. Not proud? Admiral, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? You commanded the USS Valiant through 3 successful missions in hostile waters. You saved the lives of over 300 sailors during that typhoon near the Philippines. You've been decorated for valor, leadership, and distinguished service. Any family would be honored to have you as their daughter. Rebecca felt overwhelmed by his words. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged her achievements with such genuine respect and admiration. Thank you, Commander, I mean Jim. That means more to me than you know. I should be thanking you, Jim said firmly. Leaders like you are the reason our Navy is the finest in the world. You've dedicated your life to protecting people like everyone in this room, and they don't even know it. As they talked, Rebecca noticed that a few other guests had started to pay attention to their conversation. She saw curious glances and heard whispered questions about the woman in the military uniform talking to Jim Patterson. Jim, can I ask you something? Rebecca said quietly, in all the years you've known my family, have they ever mentioned me? Jim's expression grew serious. Honestly, no, they haven't. I knew the Williamses had 2 daughters, but I only ever heard about Jessica. I just assumed their other daughter lived far away or something. I had no idea she was serving our country with such distinction. The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow, but it also filled her with a strange sense of vindication. Her family hadn't just forgotten to invite her to the wedding. They had actively hidden her existence from their friends and neighbors. They were ashamed of her service, ashamed of her sacrifices, ashamed of everything she had accomplished. Admiral, Jim said, his voice growing more serious, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your family is making a huge mistake. You're a hero, and they should be shouting your accomplishments from the rooftops. Before Rebecca could respond, she noticed that their conversation had attracted more attention. Several guests were now looking in their direction, and she could see her parents across the room, their faces growing pale as they watched Jim Patterson, their respected neighbor and client, talking animatedly with their disgraced daughter. Jim, Rebecca said softly, maybe we should keep this conversation quiet. I don't want to cause any trouble at Jessica's wedding. But Jim Patterson was a man who had spent 30 years in the Navy, and he had strong opinions about honor and respect. His voice carried across the room as he continued speaking. Trouble? Admiral, your presence here is an honor, not trouble. Do you know how many people in this room have benefited from your service? How many of them sleep safely at night because of officers like you patrolling the seas? More guests were turning to look now, drawn by Jim's passionate words and the obvious respect in his voice. Rebecca could see her parents starting to move toward them, panic written across their faces. Jim, please, Rebecca whispered urgently. You don't understand. My family doesn't want. What I understand, Jim interrupted, his voice growing louder, is that we have a genuine American hero in our midst, and nobody seems to know it. This woman has commanded warships, led thousands of sailors, and risked her life for our freedom. She deserves recognition, not to be hidden away like some family secret. The room was starting to quiet down as more people tuned in to their conversation. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she realized what was about to happen. Her parents were almost to their table now, their faces a mixture of anger and terror. "Admiral Williams," Jim said, his voice now carrying clearly across the reception hall, "would you do me the honor of letting me tell these folks about your service to our country?" Rebecca looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. Neighbors who had watched her grow up, family friends who had known her since she was a child, relatives who had written her off years ago. She saw her parents frozen in the middle of the room, their faces white with shock and fear. For 14 years, she had been erased from her family story. For 14 years, she had been treated like an embarrassment, a disappointment, a failure. But she wasn't any of those things. She was a rear admiral in the United States Navy, and she had earned that rank through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. "Actually, Jim," Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger and more confident, "I think it's time people knew the truth." Jim Patterson smiled broadly and began to stand up. But before he could speak, something happened that no one in the room expected. An elderly man at a nearby table suddenly pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. His movement was sharp and decisive, like a soldier responding to a command. He turned toward Rebecca, brought his heels together, and raised his right hand in a crisp military salute. "Admiral," he said in a clear, strong voice that carried across the now silent reception hall. The entire reception hall fell into stunned silence. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the background music seemed to fade away as 200 guests turned to stare at the elderly man saluting Rebecca. Rebecca immediately recognized the proper military bearing and returned the salute with practiced precision. "At ease, sailor," she said softly, but her voice carried in the dead silence of the room. The elderly man lowered his hand and smiled widely. "Petty Officer, First Class Harold Murphy, retired, ma'am. I served under you briefly on the USS Valiant 3 years ago, right before I retired. You probably don't remember me, but I'll never forget you, Admiral." Rebecca's mind raced back to her time commanding the Valiant. She remembered Harold, a veteran sailor in his final months of service who had impressed her with his dedication and work ethic. "Petty Officer Murphy," she said with genuine warmth. "Of course I remember you. You were one of the finest sailors I ever had the privilege to serve with." Harold's chest swelled with pride. "Thank you, ma'am. I've been telling everyone in this town about the incredible admiral I served under in my final deployment. I just never imagined she was Jessica Williams' sister. Ma'am, you saved my life during that storm in the South China Sea. If it wasn't for your leadership and quick thinking, our whole ship would have been lost." The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Rebecca could see shocked faces everywhere. Neighbors who had known her since childhood, family friends who had watched her grow up, relatives who had dismissed her as a troublemaker. They were all staring at her with new eyes, trying to reconcile the rebellious teenager they remembered with the decorated military officer standing before them. "Harold," Rebecca said quietly, "you don't need to." "Ma'am, with respect, I absolutely do need to," Harold interrupted. "These people have no idea what you've accomplished. They don't know that you're one of the most respected officers in the Pacific Fleet. They don't know that you've saved hundreds of lives and commanded some of the most advanced warships in the world." Jim Patterson stood up beside Harold, his face beaming with pride. "That's exactly what I was trying to tell everyone. We have a genuine war hero in our midst, and she's been hiding in plain sight." More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rebecca could see people pulling out their phones, probably searching for information about her online. She caught glimpses of her parents across the room. David's face was red with embarrassment, while Linda looked like she might faint. "Wait a minute," called out a woman Rebecca recognized as Mrs. Henderson from down the street. Are you telling us that little Rebecca Williams, the girl who used to climb trees and get into trouble, is now some kind of Navy big shot?" Harold turned to face the crowd, his voice full of conviction. "Ma'am, she's not just some kind of Navy big shot. She's a Rear Admiral. Do you know what that means? There are only about 60 active Rear Admirals in the entire United States Navy. She's one of the most powerful military officers in the world." "I don't understand," said another voice from the crowd. "If Rebecca is so important, why didn't David and Linda ever mention it? Why don't we see her picture in their house?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Rebecca felt every eye in the room turn to her parents, who stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, while Linda gripped his arm so tightly her knuckles were white. "That's a very good question," Jim Patterson said, his voice carrying a note of disapproval. "I've been neighbors with the Williams family for 5 years, and I never once heard them mention having a daughter in the military, let alone one who achieved such remarkable success." Jessica, who had been standing near the head table, looking confused and overwhelmed, finally found her voice. "Rebecca," she called out, her voice shaking slightly, "is this all true? Are you really an admiral?" Rebecca looked at her sister, beautiful in her white wedding dress, surrounded by all the people who had celebrated her achievements while ignoring Rebecca's. "Yes, Jess, I'm really an admiral. I have been for 2 years now. But why didn't you ever tell us?" Jessica asked, though her voice lacked conviction. Deep down, she knew the answer. "I tried," Rebecca said simply. "Every time I called home, I tried to share what was happening in my career. But you all made it clear that you weren't interested in my military stuff. You wanted me to come home, get a normal job, and stop embarrassing the family." The room was so quiet now that you could hear a pin drop. Harold Murphy stepped forward, his face flushed with anger on Rebecca's behalf. "Embarrassing the family?" he said incredulously. "Ma'am, your daughter is a national hero. She's commanded nuclear submarines and guided missile destroyers. She's been awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. She's testified before Congress about naval strategy. Embarrassing? You should be building a shrine to her in your living room." Rebecca felt tears threatening to spill over. After years of feeling like a disappointment, hearing Harold and Jim defend her so passionately was almost overwhelming. But she also felt a growing sense of anger at her family's treatment of her. "Harold, Jim, thank you both," she said, her voice stronger now. "But I think my family has made their feelings about my service very clear. They erased me from their lives because they were ashamed of my choices. They didn't invite me to this wedding because they didn't want their friends to know I existed." "That's not true." Linda finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate shriek. "We love you, Rebecca. We didn't know how to talk about your job. It's so dangerous, and we worried about you." "Worried about me?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "Mom, when was the last time you asked about my job? When was the last time you asked if I was okay? When was the last time you even asked where I was stationed?" Linda's face crumpled as she realized she couldn't answer any of those questions. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. She had no idea what her daughter did for a living, where she lived, or what she had accomplished. "Rebecca," David finally spoke up, his voice weak and uncertain. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't understand." "You didn't want to understand," Rebecca corrected. "There's a difference." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Guests were shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or leave. Jessica looked like she was about to cry, and Kevin stood helplessly beside her, not knowing how to handle the family drama that was unfolding at his wedding reception. Harold Murphy, however, wasn't finished. He had served his country for 30 years, and he had strong opinions about respect and honor. He turned to face David and Linda Williams directly. "Sir, ma'am, with all due respect, I think you owe your daughter an apology. And not just a small one, a big one. This woman has sacrificed everything for her country. She's missed holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings because she was protecting American interests around the world. And instead of being proud of her, you've been ashamed of her. Now wait just a minute, David started to say, his embarrassment turning to anger. You don't know our family situation. Rebecca chose to leave us. She chose the military over her family. No, sir, Harold said firmly. She chose to serve her country. There's a difference. And families are supposed to support each other, not cut each other off because they don't approve of career choices. Jim Patterson nodded in agreement. Harold's right. David, I've known you for 5 years, and I've always respected you as a businessman and a neighbor. But right now, I'm having trouble understanding how you could keep a daughter like this a secret. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Rebecca could see heads nodding throughout the crowd. Her parents' friends and neighbors were starting to look at them with disapproval and confusion. Suddenly, another voice called out from the back of the room. Admiral Williams. Admiral Rebecca Williams. Everyone turned to see a young woman in a navy dress uniform pushing through the crowd. She was probably in her mid-20s, with short brown hair and bright, determined eyes. She moved with the same confident bearing that Rebecca recognized in all her sailors. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, ma'am, the young woman said as she approached. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm currently stationed at Naval Base San Diego, and I've been following your career for years. You're a legend in the fleet, ma'am. Every female officer looks up to you. Rebecca was stunned. Lieutenant Commander Chin, what are you doing here? I'm Kevin's cousin, ma'am. I flew in from California for the wedding. I had no idea you were going to be here, or that you were Jessica's sister. Man, this is incredible. Wait until I tell everyone back at the base that I met you. The young officer turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing with pride and excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea who you're looking at. Admiral Williams isn't just any admiral. She's the youngest female rear admiral in the history of the United States Navy. She's broken barriers, saved lives, and inspired an entire generation of female officers. She's a living legend. The room buzzed with renewed energy and excitement. People were pulling out their phones again, searching for more information about Rebecca's career. The mood was shifting from confusion to awe, and Rebecca could see her parents' faces growing paler by the minute. But just as Rebecca was beginning to feel vindicated, just as she was starting to enjoy the recognition she had craved for so long, something happened that changed everything. Jessica, who had been standing silently near the head table, suddenly stepped forward. Her face was flushed with anger, and her voice cut through the crowd like a knife. "Stop it," she screamed. "Just stop it. This is MY Wedding Day. My special day. I don't care if Rebecca is an admiral or a general or the president of the United States. She wasn't invited here and she's ruining everything." The room fell silent once again, but this time the silence was different. It was shocked, uncomfortable, and filled with judgment. Jessica had just revealed the ugly truth that everyone had been dancing around. Rebecca really hadn't been invited to her own sister's wedding. "Jessica," Rebecca said quietly, her voice breaking slightly, "I'm your sister." "No," Jessica shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You stopped being my sister the day you chose the military over us. You left us, Rebecca. You left and never came back. And now you want to show up here and steal my spotlight on the most important day of my life." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. Even with all her military training, all her experience commanding ships and leading sailors, she felt like a little girl again. Hurt, rejected, and alone. But before she could respond, Harold Murphy stepped between the sisters, his face red with fury. "Young lady," he said to Jessica, his voice shaking with anger, "you have no idea what you're talking about. Your sister didn't abandon you. She served her country. And instead of being proud of her, you're treating her like she's some kind of criminal. You should be ashamed of yourself." Don't you dare lecture me about my own family. Jessica shot back. You don't know anything about what it was like growing up with Rebecca as a sister. She was always causing trouble, always disappointing our parents, always making everything about her. And now she's doing it again. Lieutenant Commander Chin stepped forward, her own anger evident. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're talking about one of the finest officers I've ever known. Your sister has dedicated her life to protecting people like you. She's earned every bit of respect and recognition she's getting today. I don't care. Jessica screamed. I don't care about her stupid job or her stupid uniform or her stupid medals. This is MY Day and she's ruining it. The room was in chaos now. Guests were murmuring angrily, some supporting Jessica's right to have her wedding day respected, others horrified by her treatment of her sister. Rebecca stood in the middle of it all, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. But then, something extraordinary happened. Something that would change the course of the entire evening and reveal truths that had been hidden for far too long. An elderly woman at a table near the front of the room slowly stood up. She was probably in her 80s, with silver hair and kind eyes. She walked slowly but purposefully toward the center of the room, using a cane to steady herself. Jessica Williams, she said in a voice that commanded attention despite its age, you sit down right now and listen to what I have to say. The elderly woman's voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. Every person in the room turned to look at her, including Jessica, who stopped mid-sentence with her mouth hanging open. Rebecca recognized the woman immediately. It was Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the town's retired librarian who had been like a grandmother to every child in Maplewood Heights. Mrs. Hartwell, Jessica said weakly, this is a private family matter. Private. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes flashed with anger. Child, you just screamed at your sister in front of 200 people. Nothing about this is private anymore. She turned to address the entire room, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 50 years teaching children right from wrong. I have lived in this town for 83 years, she began, her cane tapping against the floor for emphasis. I have watched 3 generations of children grow up, get married, and have children of their own. But I have never in all my years witnessed such a disgraceful display of selfishness and ingratitude. Jessica's face turned red. Mrs. Hartwell, you don't understand. I understand perfectly well, the elderly woman interrupted. I understand that your sister has spent the last 14 years serving our country while you've been playing house and planning parties. I understand that she has risen to one of the highest positions in our military while you've been worried about table decorations and flower arrangements. Rebecca felt tears burning in her eyes. Mrs. Hartwell had always been one of the few adults who had believed in her as a child, who had encouraged her dreams and ambitions when everyone else told her to be more like Jessica. But most importantly, Mrs. Hartwell continued, her voice growing stronger, I understand that Rebecca Williams has become everything this town should be proud of, while her own family has been too ashamed to even acknowledge her existence. The room was dead silent now. Even the wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures, sensing that something historic was happening. Mrs. Hartwell, David Williams finally found his voice. With all due respect, you don't know the whole story. Don't I? The elderly woman turned to face him directly. David, I've known your family since before you were born. I remember when Rebecca was a little girl, sitting in my library every day after school, reading books about ships and adventures. I remember her telling me she was going to join the Navy someday, and I remember you telling her she was being foolish. David's face turned pale. She was just a child. We wanted her to be realistic about her future. Realistic. Mrs. Hartwell laughed bitterly. That child is now a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. She commands warships worth billions of dollars. She's responsible for the lives of thousands of sailors. Exactly how much more realistic did you want her to be? Rebecca watched in amazement as the woman who had been like a grandmother to her defended her in front of the entire town. For the first time in years, she felt like someone truly understood her journey. "And you, Linda Williams," Mrs. Hartwell continued, turning to Rebecca's mother, "I remember you bragging about Jessica's grades and her perfect attendance and her college acceptance. But I never once heard you mention Rebecca's achievements. Never once did you tell anyone that your daughter was serving her country with distinction." Linda's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't that simple. We were scared for her. The military is dangerous, and we didn't want to lose her. "So instead you lost her anyway," Mrs. Hartwell said simply. "You pushed her out of your lives because you were afraid of what might happen to her. And now look where we are. She's standing here in front of us, alive and successful and decorated with honors. And you're still treating her like she's done something wrong." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Rebecca could see heads nodding throughout the crowd. Her parents' friends and neighbors were starting to look at them with open disapproval. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jessica said, her voice shaking, "I know Rebecca has had a successful career, but this is still my wedding day. I have a right to celebrate without drama." "You have a right to celebrate," Mrs. Hartwell agreed, "but you don't have a right to treat your sister like garbage. And you certainly don't have a right to exclude her from your wedding and then blame her for showing up." She turned to face the entire room now, her voice ringing with authority. "I want everyone here to understand something. Rebecca Williams left this town as a rebellious teenager with big dreams. She's come back as a war hero, a leader, and one of the most accomplished people this town has ever produced. And instead of celebrating her, her own family has tried to erase her from existence." Harold Murphy stepped forward again, his face still red with anger. "Mrs. Hartwell is absolutely right. I've served with hundreds of officers in my 30 years in the Navy, and I can tell you that Admiral Williams is one of the finest leaders I've ever known. Any town would be lucky to claim her as their own." "That's right," Lieutenant Commander Chin added. "Ma'am, Admiral Williams is a role model for every female officer in the fleet. She's broken barriers and paved the way for women like me to succeed in the military. She's a hero, and she deserves to be treated like one." Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the support pouring in from these people who barely knew her. But she also felt a deep sadness as she looked at her family, her parents standing frozen in shame, her sister glaring at her with resentment, and her new brother-in-law looking like he wanted to disappear. "Thank you," Rebecca said quietly, her voice barely audible in the large room. "Thank you all for your kind words, but I think it's time for me to go." "No." Mrs. Hartwell's cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. "You are not going anywhere, young lady. You have every right to be here, and I'll be damned if I let your family chase you away again." "Mrs. Hartwell," Rebecca said gently, "I don't want to cause any more problems. This is Jessica's day, and I've already disrupted it enough." "You haven't disrupted anything," Harold Murphy said firmly. "You showed up to support your sister, and instead of being welcomed, you've been treated like an unwanted guest. That's not your fault, that's theirs." Jim Patterson nodded in agreement. "Admiral, I've known your parents for 5 years, and I've always respected them. But right now, I'm disappointed in them. They should be proud of you, not ashamed of you." The room buzzed with conversation as guests began to take sides. Some supported Jessica's right to have her wedding day respected, but many more were horrified by the family's treatment of Rebecca. The mood was shifting dramatically, and Rebecca could see her parents realizing that they were losing the support of their community. "David," called out a man Rebecca recognized as the town's mayor, "I think you owe your daughter an apology. A big one." "That's right," agreed another voice. "Rebecca, we had no idea you were serving our country. We're proud of you, even if your family isn't." "We are proud of her." Linda Williams suddenly burst out, her voice cracking with emotion. "We've always been proud of her. We didn't know how to show it." Then why didn't you invite her to the wedding? Mrs. Hartwell asked pointedly. Why isn't her picture displayed in your house? Why have you never once mentioned her achievements to your friends and neighbors? Linda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The truth was too painful and too embarrassing to admit in front of 200 people. I'll tell you why, Mrs. Hartwell continued. Because you were ashamed of her choice to serve her country. Because you were more concerned about what people would think than about supporting your daughter. Because you cared more about your reputation than about her happiness. The accusations hung in the air like a thundercloud. Rebecca watched as her parents' faces crumpled under the weight of the truth. For the first time in her life, she saw them as they really were, not the perfect, respectable couple they pretended to be, but flawed people who had let their fears and prejudices drive away their own daughter. Rebecca, David finally spoke, his voice breaking. We made mistakes. We didn't handle things well when you left. No, Dad, Rebecca said quietly. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to be ashamed of me instead of proud of me. You chose to erase me from your lives instead of supporting me. You chose to care more about what the neighbors thought than about what I accomplished. The room was silent except for the sound of Linda Williams crying. Jessica stood frozen, her perfect wedding day in ruins around her. But Rebecca wasn't finished yet. I spent 14 years trying to make you proud of me, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I excelled in every training program, volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, and worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove that I was worth something. But nothing I did was ever good enough for you. She paused, looking around the room at all the faces staring at her. Today, I found out that you've been telling people I don't exist, that you've been so ashamed of my service that you've erased me from your lives completely. Well, I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done begging for your acceptance. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, and for the first time that evening, she looked like the commanding officer she was. I am Rear Admiral Rebecca Williams, United States Navy. I have served my country with honor and distinction for 14 years. I have commanded ships, led sailors, and risked my life to protect the freedom that allows you to have celebrations like this. Her voice carried throughout the room with military precision. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your acceptance. I have earned the respect of my peers, the admiration of my subordinates, and the trust of my superiors. That's enough for me. She turned to face Jessica directly. Jess, I came here today because I love you and I wanted to celebrate your happiness. But I can see now that I was wrong to think there was still a place for me in this family. I hope you have a wonderful marriage and a happy life. Rebecca began to walk toward the exit, her head held high and her uniform immaculate. But as she reached the door, Harold Murphy called out one final time. Admiral, Admiral Williams. She turned back to see him standing at attention, his hand raised in a crisp salute. It has been an honor to serve with you, ma'am, and it's been an honor to know you. One by one, other guests began to stand. Lieutenant Commander Chin snapped to attention and saluted. Jim Patterson, despite never having served in the military, stood and placed his hand over his heart. Mrs. Hartwell struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her cane, and nodded with deep respect. Soon, nearly half the room was standing in tribute to Rebecca. The people who had watched her grow up, who had seen her dreams dismissed by her family, who had never known of her incredible achievements. They were all standing now, showing her the respect and recognition she had never received at home. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the sea of standing figures. For the first time in her life, she felt truly honored in her hometown, not by her family, but by her community. She returned their salute with military precision, then turned and walked out of the reception hall. As the door closed behind her, she heard the room erupt in conversation and argument. She knew her family would spend the rest of the evening trying to explain and justify their behavior, but she also knew that their reputation in Maplewood Heights would never be the same. Rebecca walked out into the cool evening air and took a deep breath. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she had navigated by during her years at sea, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She had come home looking for acceptance from her family, but she had found something better. She had found respect from her community, recognition from her peers, and most importantly, she had found the strength to stop seeking approval from people who would never give it. As she drove away from Maplewood Heights for what she knew would be the last time, Admiral Rebecca Williams smiled. She was going back to her real family, the sailors who served under her command, the officers who respected her leadership, and the country that honored her service. The girl who had been erased from her sister's wedding had become a woman who needed no one's permission to be proud of who she was. And that, Rebecca realized, was the greatest victory of all. Behind her, the wedding reception continued in chaos, but Rebecca didn't look back. She had a ship to command, sailors to lead, and a country to serve. And for the first time in her life, that was enough.